In a bizarre incident 2.5 weeks ago, 1.3 million euros was stolen from a depositor of a small Montenegrin bank. Most shockingly, this took place in broad daylight, apparently with full consent in cash. So today, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that situation, what happened, and this is going to be a little bit of a reminder to you guys. I talk a lot about how some of these banks in certain places not of the same caliber as ones that you might be used to in some other areas, and hence we typically advise very high quality accounts. We're going to talk about what's going to happen to these people, what it might mean for you, and more importantly, just a strange and interesting story. So let's dive in. Before we do, if you have any, please hit the subscribe button, hit the all notification bell, give the video a thumbs up. If you enjoy it, share it with your friends. Thank you for being here. I am Michael from Offshore Citizen. We are international tax, relocation, citizenship, and global setup experts who can help you if you're interested in optimizing your life, your freedom, doing international banking, or protecting your assets worldwide. Please reach out to us. You can book a call with me at calendly.com/Michael-Rosmer. There's a link in the description below, or you can send a message through offshorecitizen.net. Okay, so April 11th, a bank in Herceg Novi in Montenegro called Lovćen Bank received a phone call from a depositor who said they would like to withdraw all of the funds from their account. Now there was about 1.3 million euros in there, split between US dollars and euros. The bank consulted to find out when they would be able to do that, and the lady was told that she could come in the next day at 3:30 p.m. to the bank to physically get this. Now, let's just start with how abnormally bizarre this is, because in most places, withdrawing large amounts of cash is difficult, and doing something with it afterwards is even more difficult. For some context, I've had banking experiences in Montenegro where if you're trying to wire out tens of thousands of dollars, it can just be a disaster. And so here we're talking about much more than that. We're talking about a situation where they physically have to get cash to give to the person, and what is the person going to do with this? There's all these anti-money laundering controls, there's all these anti-fraud controls, all these KYC controls, and yet this was the situation. Shockingly, she would be able to come in and do that the next day. Now she called a little while later to ask if she could come in instead first thing in the morning, and she arrived at 10:30 a.m. carrying a black backpack. She then proceeded to show an ID. They verified this, gave her the 1.3 million euros, a little over 1.3 million euros, in physical cash, which she put into the backpack and left. The next day, they discovered that that was not actually the person who held the account. The person who held the account had not been to Montenegro in over a year. They were Montenegrin, however, they live overseas, and they happened to do some checks and find out that the person had showed up with a fake ID. The ID had all the information of the person who was the Montenegrin citizen, but had the photo of the person who went in to go and do this. They'd made this kind of strange request as well. They said their parents had access to the account and to please not inform them that they were withdrawing the funds from the account. So we're going to find out what happens in the future to the money and the person, but let's just consider that this is a scenario that how did this happen? What went on here? You would think, in fact, one of the comments that was made by the bank was they stated it would be unheard of that they wouldn't know the person who held this account by facial by recognition, by being able to tell who they were, because there'd be only one or two clients with that much money at the bank at any given branch anyway, and so they would be fairly well known. Which leads you to believe, how was it that they had the social insurance number of the person, the date of birth, all their critical details, and more importantly, how did they know that the person had that much money in the bank account? Now, conceivably, what was happening there, we don't know for sure, but conceivably, one would believe that there was an insider who was involved in this. And this goes a little bit to one of the things I tell clients quite a bit. I'll talk to them about how if you're, for example, in a country like Mexico or Colombia or something like that, there's international reporting around the world. And that international reporting was driven largely by organizations like the OECD, like the United States, pushed for by the EU, etc., with these things in mind of being able to evade or avoid tax evasion and other sorts of failures to report within their home country. The issue with that is this information sharing takes place in almost every country in the world, and what happens is the information gets reported back to the country of residence. And what I've told clients repeatedly is your information is not necessarily safe in some of these countries. If you're in Sweden or something, maybe you're used to your information being relatively safe. You have these global data protection regulations to try and keep the information safe, even though it kind of breaks the internet or makes the internet less pleasant to browse, having these little pop-ups. It does nothing to actually keep people safer, but they've got lots of regulations around it. But more importantly, there's just less fraud in these countries. There's less of these things going on. And there's less sort of predatory activity within these organizations. If you're looking at some of these other countries, that is not true. You have organized crime very often who are having plants or people that they're paying off within organizations. Information that gets sent to the government is not private. There are people who will get that information for local mafias, for organized crime, etc. And the police's current thesis with respect to this woman is that she was indeed part of an organized crime group from a surrounding country. Again, don't know exactly what the truth will be, and we don't know what will take place. But the bottom line is your information is simply not safe in some places like it is in others. And not only that, the normal standard checks that might prevent something like this from happening. And to be fair, some of us might like if it was so easy as that you could withdraw cash and do something with it. It'd be interesting to find out what do they do with all that money, because it's certainly not easy. You can't typically show up at a bank and say, oh, I'd like to make a deposit for 1.3 million euros. You're gonna have a problem with that. Banks are gonna be like, no, thank you. We're not interested. So conceivably they have to spend it, or they have to have some way of converting it into something useful for them, which, they're organized criminals. Of course, they're probably used to that process. But the bottom line is, you have to be aware in some of these places that it's not like your home country. I was talking recently to a client who was sort of making a position of, oh, I don't like to lie, I don't like to this, that, very what I would call Western ideals. And I'm like, dude, you're in a third world country where things are just not the way that you're used to them. The reality is, in some of these other countries, you have to be much more careful. And you need to understand, when in Rome, follow the lessons of the jungle in the jungle that you are in, because it can be concerning. There are places that it's not safe to walk around with an expensive watch. There are places that it is not safe to have your cell phone out walking around because somebody will just grab it out of your hand and run. This is not what it is like if you're used to some place like Taiwan or Japan or Singapore, etc. So anyway, what will happen to this lady? The statement from the bank, supposedly, is that there is insurance to cover these sorts of things. So the bank carries fraud insurance, and that should protect them. Now, this being said, I'm always a little bit skeptical about the ability of certain insurances to pay out, because there's often different things they can have in the policy, different caveats that will say, oh, you know what? You actually don't qualify because of XYZ. And I've seen this with property insurance. I've seen people who their homes have been flooded. By the way, in Western developed countries, they've been paying the insurance for 20 years, and all of a sudden, you know what? It's not covered because of some technicality. When you're in a third world country, or you're in a second world country, or some place where there's more corruption, there's less rule of law, etc., the likelihood that that happens is worse, right? So I would be a little bit cautious. I think if you were to go to Chase, probably there's a very good chance Chase Bank is going to pay it out, because the reputational damage to them is just not worth it. They're going to make sure that the person is covered. If you're talking about a small bank in Montenegro, how protected are you going to be? Hard to say. Hopefully for her, she gets the money back, but this comes to the second part, which is there's a reasonable chance that actually this is a case of insurance fraud, that they're in a situation where the objective was to try to rip off the insurance company because they knew that the bank was not going to end up losing, and they knew that the depositor was not going to lose. And in fact, there's a very interesting piece of information that came out recently in this case, that apparently the lady had been in contact with the bank shortly before, and that possibly she actually, we're talking about the lady who is overseas, the actual account holder, may have also been in on it. Now, of course, that's pure speculation. We have no idea whatsoever that that is what happened, but you can kind of understand where, oh, you know what? We can do some sort of a little deal here, arrange the different pieces, and voila, who ends up paying is the insurance company. And of course, there's lots and lots of examples of this all around the world. So anyway, super interesting story to have happen. Very, very unusual case, to be fair. Something like this hasn't happened in 15 years, and the bank was saying this is an isolated case, and so on and so forth. All true, all true. This being said, do you want to be in a situation where your money is at risk? Do you want to be in a situation where, even if you get the money back, what's the process going to be for that to happen? I actually know of some people who were defrauded recently of a few $100,000, and it's a nice idea. They called the bank's fraud department and went through things. To this date, A few months later, still haven't been repaid. Maybe they will be, maybe they won't be, but it certainly is a massive disruption to your life in most situations. So this is why I always recommend, if clients can work with higher tier banks in stronger jurisdictions, much better. Diversify your money, much better. I've talked before about this in other videos. You can go and check out some of them. If you want help with any of those things, please reach out to us, book a call with me, and check out some of our other videos on banking, which we will put up here to see what are some good banking options that you could take advantage of. I will see you on the next video.